Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success, joined today by our president, Matt Boisvert. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. We are going to have a great show today. I'm really excited because, we've had Dr. Woosley on several times. Whenever I have a new topic, I'm always like, can you come on and talk about this thing? Because she has so much wisdom to share with us. But yesterday, as we were talking about today's subject, I was like, hey, can we just talk about you? Because she's so interesting and has done so many things and has so much wisdom to offer. So she's going to join me in a little bit. Matt, do you want to talk about our theme for this year, 2025?
I mean, our theme of intentionality is perfect for us, and as I think about our schools, the schools that we work with, you and I really try to encourage our schools, our people to be very intentional with the work that they do. And it's really funny because I just, we're moving some things around. And I just came across our student retention guide that we created back in 2012, maybe.
Some time ago.
I mean, a long time ago. But it's really fun because it's all really about being intentional. And so, like, walking through the process, being really thoughtful for each of these things, like, hey, let's be very intentional with our assessment of what we're currently doing. And let's be intentional about how we're identifying our at-risk students or the students who need the most of our support. And then things like, well, let's be intentional with service blueprinting. And so it was really fun, little walk down memory lane for me. But what I really like is this quote. This is from Bryant and Lowe. Student retention begins and ends with focus on the individual student. And to me, that's being very intentional.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because there's this element that we always say to schools, which is we get to have a very, very laser focused on student success and retention, which is such a luxury because all of our partners and all of our clients, they have 85 other things that they have to do, right? And so just being really intentional about giving them thought leadership on that is one of my most favorite things that we do. And especially in the beginning, Matt, when we only had 8 clients, all we did was sit around and think about things. So we have a little bit less time now that we are so much bigger, but I'm excited this year to dive into Slow Productivity, which is by Cal Newport, who is the one who wrote Deep Focus, and just trying to understand, I just finished the first chapter of that book. And it's so interesting because it talks about how do you quantify productivity and how easy it is to do that with farmers and with factories. But when you talk about knowledge work, it's so much harder, but really foundational to being successful is knowing what productivity looks like. And, our faculty know this, which is we're not counting things. We have to have space in our day to think well and deeply about whatever it is we're trying to improve or address. And so I think it's going to be really fun for us to go through that this year. So I'm excited about it. Anything else to add before we dive into the State of the Union?
No, let's do it.
Let's do the State of the Union. We do a lot less chit chat now that we don't have to talk about our Google searches. You haven't found a new book for intentionality, so we got to get it together around here. I don't know what is going to replace Google searches, because what are we going to talk about being intentional? Like one thing that we did that was intentional this week? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to think about it.
Okay, we got to think about it. Let's move on to the State of the Union, which I was talking to Sherry before we started. She's like, what are you going to say about the State of the Union? Because there's a lot of crazy business going on. So we've got some federal funding freezes that are happening, which everyone is really stressed out about. We've just got a lot of, everything is in a state of transition, right, with the new administration. And so just trying to figure out what that's going to look like. So most of that is pretty recent news. So we don't have the luxury of kind of reflection on that and really understanding where we are. So I think probably next time in our next episode, which will be 13, where we talk to Dr. Hayes from George Fox, just about, she has some really great wisdom that we're going to talk about next time we're together, but perhaps we will have a little bit better perspective on what's happening in the State of the Union then. I do have some things to tell you about today, though. You remember last time we were together that the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center had just said, oops, our bad. We kind of made a mistake when we told you that enrollment was declining by 5%, and everyone like shaped the conversation since they put out that information in October. Well, they're clarifying a little bit better, like, sorry that happened. First of all, Matt, that came out of their state informed enrollment report, which was, it's like the Stay Informed enrollment report came about because people were chomping at the bit in 2020 to understand what the climate of higher education was going to look like, right? So that came when people were really hungry for data. They put it together. They uncovered their mistake this time, but Shapiro, who is the research center executive director, said that the error that they uncovered this time has been present for every Stay Informed report all the way going back to 2020. So they've been consistent in their methodology. It's just been wrong. So every one of those reports has been incorrect. Which, I mean, it's hard because I'm happy that it's not correct data. Like, I'm happy the outlook is not as negative as they're saying. But also, it's like you said last time we talked about this, like, how do we know what data to make our plans on, right? Because a lot of people wrote a lot of stuff about the reason why this data was the way it was, the reason why we were facing this huge, decline in enrollment.
Right.
Okay, let me see. There's something else that I wanted to tell you about that. What is it? I don't know. So the real data that has now been published is that enrollment has passed pre-pandemic levels with a first-year surge. I have some caveats about this because it's like, that is true, but it's not all schools and it's not all student population. So let's actually...
So first of all, instead of being 5% lower, it's 5% higher. It's a 10-point swing.
Right. So it's 4.5% higher, whereas they were reporting it was 5% lower. Undergraduate enrollment rose by 4.7%, although it remains 1% below the 2019 levels. First year undergraduate enrollment slightly surpassed pre-pandemic levels for the first time, rising 5.5%. Okay. Here's some of the details about that. Much of fall's recovery was powered by a rapid boost in alternative credential and certificate programs. So they're like, an increase in fall enrollment came out of those programs, which the report shows is nearly 10% year over year up and 28.9% up since 2019. So this is like a lot of growth in those areas, right? Meanwhile, enrollment in the bachelor's degree programs increased only 2.9% and associate programs by 6.3%. So much smaller growth in those areas. They have a lot of details this is shocking to me. And who knows if it's true? I mean, that's the other problem, right? Anytime you hear this data and you're like, this is a surprise, maybe it's not right. But they're saying for-profit colleges experienced the strongest enrollment growth of any institution, up 7.4%. Community colleges were next, up 6%. And then public four-year enrollment grew about 3%. Enrollment in private nonprofit institutions grew about 3.8%. So interesting, right?
I was just thinking, how many board meetings have happened over the last 5 years where they're presenting all of this wrong data, right? And they're like, well, just so you know, we're keeping track. I mean, our enrollment's down, but everyone's enrollment's down.
And Matt, it makes me, I should talk to Sherry about this because I'm sure she'll have a lot of insight for us. But, we are always talking to schools where we're asking them about the data that they have on their students. And then they tell us that's what iPads is reporting. And then we're like, how did iPads get the data? And they're like, that's what we told iPads. And we're like, right, there's no check and balance in that. It's like they give the data and then iPads reports it as official, but there's no check. And one of the things that always happens with our schools is when you actually take the data out and have sort of an independent validation of that data, then all of a sudden you can compare two things. But oftentimes on the campus, right, they only have one source of data, which is coming out of IR. So it's tricky.
Do you know if they're going to go back and correct the other years?
I don't know. They
Okay.
didn't say anything about it. So, I mean, I think there's some interesting things here. They disaggregate the data, like Black and Hispanic enrollment grew 6.8% each, which is the largest increase since 2019. HBCU enrollment grew by 3.8%, so I like that. Very selective institutions only grew by 0.6%, but they don't really want to grow, right? They have a big enough pool that if they wanted to, they could. And then enrollment rose in every state except for 2. And in those 2 states, it fell by less than 1% in both cases. Do you want to guess what 2 states? I don't think you're going to be able to guess because I don't think there's any rhyme or reason to it, but you can try.
I was trying to think of like what states would have an economy where people would choose to go into work, into the workforce rather than college. So it was, I'm just gonna guess that Vermont's one of them.
Are you kidding? Did you look that up?
No.
Oh, wow. That's shocking. It is Vermont. You've been thinking about that for the last 2 hours since
I've been thinking about it. No, I didn't look it up. I promise. That's funny. I was going to make a Noah Kahn joke.
Yeah, it's Vermont and Nebraska. So good job. All right. I'm shocked.
Wow.
Rarely shocked me, but I'm really shocked. Okay. This next article, I think, is so fascinating. I love it as a thought exercise. It's coming out of the New York Times, and the headline is, "What's your major? Some say sports should be an acceptable answer." So the first part of this article opens with an educator, Dr. Hollander, who's a clinical professor at New York's University School of Professional Studies, who is a long-term proponent of the intellectual value of basketball specifically. He's like, positionless play helps students learn entrepreneurial techniques. Fast breaks can teach interpersonal communication. He actually lobbied the Catholic Church to name a patron saint of basketball, which they did. And he got December 21st passed as the National World Basketball Day. That the United Nations did that. That was okay. So he's like, students should be allowed to major in athletics. And now he's going to Nike, who we know has a lot of money. And Nike's like, we think that's a great idea. You should have a major of athletics. They're talking about earning credits for working on your sport, like practicing and playing, taking classes on more theoretical curriculum that helps them understand social, cultural, anthropological, and psychological elements. Sport-specific strategy courses, along with courses in nutrition, performance psychology, and physiology. Now, Matt, I want to make a distinction. This is different than coaching. You're not getting a degree in coaching. You're not getting a degree in sports management or sports business. This is literally a degree in athletics. Okay, I read the first 2/3 of this article and I was like, this is crazy town. But then they make the point that how is this different than getting a degree as a musician or as a dancer, which I think is really, really interesting, right? Because in those 2 professions, you have practicum, you're practicing all the time, you're studying the theory behind it. Some people might say you could be a dancer or an actor or a musician without a college degree, which is true, but we would argue that a college degree is not only about career aspirations, right? So I think it's a really interesting debate to have about whether or not you could just have a general athletics degree and what is the advantage of that and where does that take you, right? I think it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting. I was just thinking about some of the great, college football coaches who could come back and teach for these majors, right?
Yeah.
Like that'd be like Lou Holtz. That'd be kind of interesting to have him as one of your professors. Something to explore.
Well, what I think is so interesting about it is that if you only think about college degrees as a path to a career, I think you're going to have a little bit more difficulty with it. But the truth is, Matt, how many people do we know that majored in something, philosophy, art, dance, music, acting, where that's not actually the career path they went down, right? They have a degree, but it only set them up in terms of liberal arts, like being a good thinker and understanding how to learn things, right? And those sorts of issues. So I don't know. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I could see it.
I'd like to have a debate on it. I would like to have two people just kind of debate whether or not there's some merit there. And, you know, it's interesting with NIL and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just a whole different perspective on athletics.
I'm actually, as you were talking about this, I'm actually shocked that there isn't a school that offers this as a major.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And also it's interesting to think about, like, you get a major in athletics, but can you get a minor in basketball? That would be another thing you could do, right? Like this broad umbrella and then like this specific thing that you would really delve into. Okay. I think there's a lot of fun things about that we could talk about. All right. An article coming out of Inside Higher Ed about biology syllabi lacking learner-centered principles. Learner-centered principles. What I want to pull out of this is just that a lot of times, especially for our freshmen or our students who are early in their college career, we take things like study behaviors, metacognitive evaluations, or academic help seeking behaviors, and we put those in first year experience or like in a workshop, or we try to figure out some way to get our students involved in those sorts of things by kind of sliding them in someplace. And this article is about how one place that would be really helpful for students to put those things in is introductory sciences, technology, engineering, mathematics courses, any sort of course that's kind of a gatekeeper course. So instead of being like, we're just going to talk about, you know, academic help seeking behaviors, if you put that in your intro to biology class, you have sort of a lab where you're able to practice. This is how you're going to get help for this test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
So this study looked at 115 introductory biology syllabi from 94 unique institutions and basically said, how would we score these in terms of how well they're offering these different behaviors and sort of embedding those into the courses. Now, they have their caveat, which is just because it's not in the syllabus doesn't mean necessarily the faculty member isn't talking about that. There may be some elements of that in there. But if we think about the syllabus as the contract between the student and the faculty member, we could make some assumptions about whether it's not, if it's not in the syllabus, that it's not actually happening in the class. What I wanted to point out here is that only 17% of the syllabi that were provided listed any sort of academic resources or encouragement to use those resources or an explanation about how to use those resources. So, you know, we have been saying from the beginning of time, hey, faculty, put in your syllabus. We have tutoring and we have whatever you guys call Ferris 360 on your campus. Because when you embed it, then it's not weird for the faculty member to say, Matt, I'm concerned about you. I'm going to send you to Beacon and they're going to be able to help you, right? So that for sure is a place where you can grow on your campus, like kind of embedding that into your syllabus. We just talked about that in our spotlight session last week about how to work with your syllabus committee to get that paragraph approved so that it's just ubiquitous. It's in all of the syllabi. So I think it's a great idea. All right, I have two more for you. Actually, I have three more for you. One is that OMPs, which is
OPM.
OPM, online program managers, are kind of in trouble. I don't know if you remember that the Biden administration was kind of like, they're misrepresenting what they're doing. You guys need to be really careful about using them to build your online programs. But they didn't really give any specifics about what that meant or what that looked like until just recently, like I think in the last couple of weeks, Biden released a Dear Colleague letter letter that attempted to be like, this is what we're talking about when we're saying we're really unhappy with the OPMs. So the first thing they said is they are not allowed to say that an online program is the same or equivalent to the college's campus-based version if they have dissimilar admissions criteria, completion rates, faculty qualifications, or other substantive differences. So that's the first thing. If you have like two very different experiences, you can't pretend like they're the same thing. And Matt, I can think of a list of schools that are going to have to reevaluate.
Yeah, I just went through a list. I mean, but really, because I have friends who have taught both, in person, in class, and then through this online program that is completely different.
For sure. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that OPMs cannot represent themselves as working directly for colleges. So they're specifically looking at language they're using, but also whether or not they have an email address that looks like it comes from the college, a .edu address. They're not allowed to do that. They have to say, we actually are working for this other company. We're just like, basically they have to act like headhunters, right? Like, hey, we're trying to fill this position at a school. We don't actually work for the school. And the other piece of that is they're not allowed to refer to themselves, if they're in recruiting or sales role, they cannot refer to themselves as academic counselors. They have to actually say, we are in sales or recruiting or something like that. So it'll be interesting. This is like, where does the rubber meet the road, and whether or not the new administration is going to enforce that Dear Colleague letter, that's another question, but that's the guidance that has come out against OPMs. So,
wow.
All right. Two more. This one I'm super excited about, Matt. I was telling you the Caring Campus model, which comes out of a nonprofit institute for evidence-based change. I love what they're doing because they are saying we have to teach faculty concrete, clearly defined, measurable behaviors that are going to help increase a student's sense of belonging and a better understanding of this idea that we're in a caring community. So what I like about this program is it's not a lot of sort of esoteric philosophy, like let's sit around and talk about what student success means to us, and then we'll have a 5-year plan about how we're going to, like, none of that. They are very, very pragmatic suggestions where they say we're going to do like a leadership orientation, then we're going to do training with faculty, then we're going to do coaching with them so that they deliver. And they have 6 behavioral commitments, which this is a super helpful framework. They've separated out into face-to-face behaviors and then online behaviors. So here are the 6. Are you ready? Number 1, upon the first class meeting, faculty employ activities to engage and bond with all students. So they're like, your first class is only about getting to know your students. On an online course, faculty send a welcome letter to all students who are asked to respond with a letter describing themselves. So that's one behavior that we can measure, right? The next one is learn and use students' names. For both of these, you learn your students' names and that's what you call them. Yes, please do that, right? A comprehensive syllabus, moments that matter, assignments early and often, situational fairness. So they give you examples of all of these things and measurements for them. And then they say, if you have faculty do these things, it will increase your student retention. And this article goes through different schools who've used this. I think they're in 125 schools across the United States. And I really like them because they're like, don't mess with your faculty who don't want to do it. That's fine. They don't have to. The ones who are really invested and want to care for your students, those are the ones who are going to make a difference for them. So I love that. I think I told you that one of the things they say when they're training faculty, their very first question is, who is the person who encouraged you and helped you to get into education, to decide to become an educator? And then they use that to say, you know how important they were to you. Here are some behaviors that communicate that to students. So we've done that at conferences and we love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes me think about my mentor and really in the classroom, when you're kind of thinking along those lines, then you know, like this is the kind of faculty engagement that changed my life and a really good model. And so why wouldn't I want to do that?
Yeah.
I really do what you said about the focus on those who want to do it. Don't waste your time with the curmudgeons. I love that. And, if you could weave that into tenure and promotion, like here's someone who's actually demonstrated a dedication to their students compared to those who aren't.
Yeah, for sure. All right. My last one, which I have felt a little bad about covering this article because this is going to be a little bit of I told you so. But I figure since I get to host Cap and Gown, I can take like 2 minutes to be like, hey, guys, I told you so. Right. I think it's okay. This article is out of Inside Higher Ed. It says students feel spammed by an overload of university emails. I know you don't say, they do. Right. So this article is about how students are like, stop sending us 50 million emails. We cannot read all of them. Matt, I'm a student. And I last week got 33 emails from my institution. In those 33 emails, they told me, who is a online adult, long distance learner, about the winter formal, about the blood drive on campus, about the parking lot being closed, about how the buses run on campus, and opportunities to volunteer for MLK Day. Now, those are all really great things, but every time I get an email like that, I'm like, they don't even know who I am. Like, they're not filtering their emails at all. And all I'm doing is getting all of these emails. So students are like, I'm not reading any email that starts with Dear Student. I am not reading any email that is a mass communication or comes from not a person, just an office or a newsletter or something like that. I'm not reading any of that. What I read are emails sent by somebody that I know, my tutor, my academic advisor, my faculty member coming out of the LMS, which I have gotten a lot of flack over the years about people being like, why don't you guys send automatic emails? You guys, that's why, because I know students don't read stuff that comes from the cloud or whatever.
Not only students don't, but we don't. I think it's a human behavior, right? Like if I looked at my email right now, I've probably got 6,000 unread emails because
from
they
not
weren't
people,
right?
So it's really interesting. I think, okay, one thing that I think is super helpful for practitioners to remember, this says students feel as though they're being spammed, but we don't actually know how many emails it takes to create that effect. A small number of emails asking you to do life administration may feel like a horrible burden if you're not used to doing life administration, which I think is really relevant. Like a student maybe only gets 3 emails, but if every single one of those emails is telling them you have to go here and do this thing and sign this thing and turn it in and then go, they are going to feel really overwhelmed. So we coach our schools to have like very short messages to students, right? To make it manageable. If they read it, which you can see in our system, they're opening it 5 times, but they're not doing the thing. You've got to send like a much shorter communication to them. But just thinking about how we're communicating with students, the summary of this article is it suggests that to improve student engagement, universities should consider routing all well-being messages through personal tutors, and that administrative staff should be introduced to students by people who they have relationships with in order to increase trust and communication. So if you're my faculty member and you say to me, hey, Rachel, when Sherry sends you an email, you should read it because she's going to be able to help you do better in this class, it's more likely I'm going to do it, which that sounds very familiar to me.
Yep, you should have written this down.
Yeah, I should have my prediction. So I love that. I love when we know the nature of students and when we have built good technology to support the fact that students like to be connected to people. It's the best part about going to college, right? So I love that. All right. Awesome. Anything else you want to add for State of the Union?
No.
All right. I'm going to kick you out.
You've forgotten how to end that.
What am I supposed? Oh, and that is the State of the Union?
Yeah.
Okay. And that is the State of the Union. All right, Sherry, come join me. Hey, how'd I do with the coverage? We tried to stay pretty positive.
Yeah, Yeah, I took notes because there's so much there. Oh my gosh, so many ideas and everything. I love it.
There's so much going on. But okay, can we just, I'm just going to tag this on to the State of the Union. What are we supposed to do when we can't trust data that's coming out? Like, I honestly don't know what good guidance is when you have national organizations who are leading our conversations around what we should be doing with strategy. And then they're like, just kidding, the reverse of what we said, right?
Well, but I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to have good data on your own campus. Because the national data is context. It's part of the meaning of your data. But you got to have good data on your own campus. You have to be very clear about what things mean and how you use them and how they're calculated. You have to build in your own checks and balances and other things.
Yeah.
Because I think you even mentioned something about, if there's only a single data point and it's coming out of IR, that's fine. But do you actually know what it means?
I know.
Do you know what the longitudinal look is? Because if your numbers are going up and they start talking about the national going down, that is lovely, but that's just a point. Are they really where you want them?
Right.
It's not always like, how do you compare? It's what do you want?
Yeah. And I think it is such a good conversation to have on your campus. If you really know your data, I think what it does is help you uncover the truth of you, which you're exactly right. It's like we have a national context, but we do have schools that fall on the bell curve on one end or another because of what they're doing. Yes. So being able to say, like, maybe there are fewer students enrolling, but we're doing a good job and these are the reasons why, right? Instead of the sky is falling kind of mentality. So
we used to also have to report data to the state, and then they would give us back, and we acted as a check and balance for their numbers, and they acted as a check and balance for us. Because if we sent data there and they gave us back something and it didn't match, you start going, wait, what are you doing over there? Right? And it could get confrontational sometimes, but it was a productive confrontation.
I totally agree. I just think that one way, like, here's the data and it came from one place and it is, right? And you're like, how do you know? How would you have any idea whether or not that was actually accurate or not? So I like that, being able to compare. Okay, let me introduce you. I feel like I don't really have to because everybody knows you because you hang out with me all the time. But you right now are the Director of Analytics and Research at Elantra. And I feel like I've known you for a very long time. You were at Macmillan before that, and then MapWorks before that. And you not only have a lot of education around educational, educational leadership, and it starts with an O.
Organization.
Yeah, organization. But also just all of your expertise with data and how we tell stories with data and all of those pieces. Can you give our listeners just a summary of your career path to get to where you are now? Just so they know.
And the funny part is, I mean, you began talking about intentionality, and my career was not intentional, which I think a lot of ours aren't. They're intentional in the moment, but not in the long scheme. So, like, I got an undergraduate degree in K-12. I was going to be a high school teacher and realized that wasn't for me. And so I went and worked at a boarding school for a year as a house parent and learned a ton, but it wasn't for me. So then I went, if you can, like, this is right pivot, right? I went and worked insurance claims for 3 years.
Really?
Northridge earthquake hit, worked 70 hours a week and realized this wasn't for me. Now, that allowed me to afford grad school. So then I got to go to grad school, right? And I went and got a master's and a PhD in organizational leadership and educational leadership in organizations. I studied social networks. I studied all kinds of nerdy, fun stuff. And then I went into institutional research and assessment and picked a job at Ball State that had a lovely focus on student success. I'm so grateful. And
that's remarkable, actually.
Oh, I know. And connected up with the housing department, and I connected up with the student affairs department. I ended up teaching in that department while I was in IR. I created an IR certificate program. I had a survey project that was super, super cool, but old school. mail merge on my desktop.
Ooh.
Oh, really old school. And that's what allowed me to connect up with EBI, because I needed some way to get it like not on my desktop.
Yeah.
And I laughed because way back then I joked about the partnership with EBI and Ball State started because I knew if I tried to do it in-house, my kids wouldn't be able to use it. Right? You know, like, which is true. They're now in college. They would not have been able to use it. And so then I partnered with EBI and we developed MapWorks. And I was still at Ball State for the first half of that development, and then eventually moved to EBI full time. EBI got bought by Macmillan Learning. And then, yeah, kind of as you do in a company, you morph around. I took over other surveys. I built out a team, did all kinds of stuff, worked some on iClicker. And then it's almost a year ago, a little more than a year ago, Macmillan sold this sort of part of the company off to Elantra. So, yeah.
Sure, you are one of a handful of people who have this experience of data and student success. It's such a rarity.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about our student success funnel and it's find them, do some stuff with them, and then measure. And usually those are separated. It's like the find them and the measure. Some people love that. And then the connect and solve, some people love that. But you really have had the experience of how all four of those pieces fit together, which is really rare.
Yeah. It's probably in part that, my ed background. I have 3 ed degrees, and I taught everything from preschool to mom and me to adult grad classes to everything. And you start to see how it's all interconnected.
So I want to go down the path of how you have used data to help us find students who are struggling and then address that. But also there's something about you that, given our keyword of intentionality, I want to highlight in our time together. And that is, I feel like you pick, I don't know if you do it every year or maybe it's just cyclical, but you just pick something to be intentional about. I'm thinking about the art that you've done. I'm thinking about learning drums, going to live entertainment. Like, I feel like you just have a theme. Is it every year you do that, or is it just like as it comes?
Some of both, I think.
Okay.
I will tell you, there's a couple reasons for it. One of them is when you work on a campus, you have a very clear sense of time. Do you know what I mean? You have semesters, you have breaks, you have whatever. When you work in a company, you kind of get a sense of time because oftentimes your clients, your members, whoever they are, have a sense of time. But otherwise, it can all start to blend.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not a big fan of yearly resolutions or any of that, but I am a big fan of finding opportunities to be a novice again and to suck at something. I am a big believer in if something is important, you got to figure out how to work it in, and being intentional.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I watch too many people, even and you're a grad student. You know those people that go through grad school and get a really big head about all the stuff they know?
Yeah.
I never. So it pays to, like, I taught preschool while I was in. I'll tell you, 8-year-olds are not impressed with grad school. Like, they were like, what grade are you in? And you go, oh, 20th. They go, oh my God. So those novice opportunities, keeping those people in my life that question me and cause me to think differently is really important.
It's such a good point, because we should all be learners and teachers, right? And there's a thing that we have to guard against about being prideful. If we spend too much time in a place where we just know it and it makes sense and we've done it for 20 years and what's wrong with everybody, and get with the program, and right. Yeah. And it is such a good, humbling reminder to be in a place where you're like, you are using words that I literally don't understand. Right?
The acronym. Well, the other thing I think is, if we are going to really serve our students, we have to be able to listen to them. And the worst thing you can do, in my humble opinion, is to see them as kids or see them as young. I've been around, I know better. But they bring a whole set of things to teach us too.
Yeah.
And so you got to really watch for that sort of arrogance.
It's funny because I was joking about these emails that I'm getting, but really what those emails that don't pertain to me, what it tells me is that nobody is listening to me, right? That somehow whoever's sending those emails has expertise, like, you need to know this, Rachel. And I'm like, but really I don't. And if you would listen to me, you would know that, right? So it is a really interesting balance of arrogance and humility, and how it's why I like expert so much. I really like showing up as an expert around how students can be successful, but then also saying to the person, the student, like, you're an expert in who you are and where you came from and what you need, So I really love that.
And the times are a-changing, so we better be paying attention to them.
Yeah. Talk about a bunch of words that you don't understand. My daughter's 13, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about half the time. So it's good to be a student occasionally. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about MapWorks. So the first part of this question is, will you help everyone understand what MapWorks, like what the goal of MapWorks was and how schools used it? But then also coming out of that, kind of what is the challenge as we're thinking about creating tools to help us identify students who are struggling and increase retention? It's everybody wants to do it, but there's a lot of hardships around that. So will you give us kind of some guidance there?
Yeah, it started very simply as a survey. And it was a survey, but it was really kind of uniquely positioned at the time. It was 3 to 5 weeks into a student's, first semester on campus, asking them about their experiences. And then it fed information back to the student themselves, to their advisor, and to their hall director. And then we also did, bigger analysis and other things. But the key, which I think made it really unique, and this is so long ago, I'm embarrassed, but was that we were getting information and we were giving very non-anonymized. I mean, if Rachel was struggling, we said to Rachel, here's your feedback. And, oh, hey, hall director, Rachel's struggling. Hey, advisor, Rachel's struggling. And I think, back in those days, mail merge, that was a challenge to do. And to do it at scale was really hard. And as you said, it then kind of changed into really predictive things where we were really building models and sophisticated stuff so that we could see who needed support at 3 to 5 weeks in, knowing that we had time to change it.
Yeah.
And then we ended up building a whole platform, actually, and this is, I think, where you and I crossed over, it was similar to Pharaoh's, and the values were similar to Pharaoh's.
That's right.
About getting students help and trying to make a difference for things. So I'm really proud of the work we did, even though it's not around anymore, because I think we changed some of the conversations around students and what's important. And it wasn't about what test scores did they come in with.
Yeah.
It was about who are the students and what are their current experiences.
Right.
Which sense of belonging, homesickness. Yeah.
I think it came at such an important time because, there was this shift. I think when I went to school, no one wondered what I was thinking, honestly. I mean, right? It was like one of those things where it's like you show up to college and you either stay or you don't stay. And then that's the end of it, right? And so I think it's hard to remember that the idea that we're asking students to reflect on what their experience is was really, really novel. Yeah. Because before that, it wasn't as important. We weren't talking about student success. We weren't talking about retention. We really were coming out of a time where it was look to your left and your right, someone's going to leave, and that was good because they can't cut it, right? So this idea that we're getting students to reflect on what's going on with them, I think was really novel.
Or if we were doing any of that work, it was in an FYE class. And it was not broader than that. And it was not campus wide. It was, this is the place where you have the conversation. And so you had, some really phenomenal work of John Gardner and that institute and those things who were doing really great things, but it wasn't necessarily getting across campus.
Comprehensive.
Or bringing groups together to talk about it. in ways I think that were so important. Or we were talking at these really global levels where, students struggle with this issue. Well, some do and some don't.
Yeah.
And that was part of when we really got into predictive analytics and research and things to start understanding what kind of homesickness is a transition issue.
I know your delineation of homesickness, I think, is so helpful just as a mental structure, right? Like just as architecture in our brain we are talking about two different things when we talk about homesickness. Will you explain the two dimensions there?
And it's one of the, I think, things that when we put it out there, I was so proud of it. I still never published on it, which cracks me up. Some folks from Iowa State did, so I'm really happy they used their campus data and did that. But you're right. What we did, and we thought there was one kind. And I don't know if you remember way back, we began with, I will say now in hindsight, stupid. How far away are you from campus? How many times are you talking to your mother? Those helicopter parent things.
Right.
And figured out that those didn't work. And so then we started asking, are you missing friends? Are you missing family? Are you thinking about going home all the time? Do you regret leaving home? And what we found was two different kinds. One, which is I would say, a very common transition issue.
Right.
Left a bunch of stuff. I miss that stuff. I've got this I haven't figured out stuff here, but that's transition. We've all experienced that. The other is what we were calling distress and homesickness distress. I regret leaving home. I think about home all the time. And it's a completely sort of different, sometimes they go hand in hand. A lot of times they don't.
Yeah.
That one was absolutely related to retention. It was even related to academic performance.
Yeah.
And that's the one that when I see it and I hear it, I grow concerned. It's not common. And the cool thing when we differentiated those is I remember a friend of mine, Jennifer, went to her FYE class and she really did social norming around the one.
Nice.
What foods are you missing? What things do you miss from home? Having those conversations so all the students could see that other people had that.
Everybody is feeling that way. Yeah.
And then it was the other one where you really thought about interventions.
So one of the things that I love that you taught me coming out of that too was the feeling that your family was unhappy that you had left, right? Which is a really different, it's a different environment than your parents being like, and we're so excited, go, it's going to be so great, right? That you have families who depend on you for a lot of different things, for jobs or for moral support or watching your siblings, or they don't understand, your first generation, they don't really understand college and all of those things. And so the message coming from home is, we wish you hadn't left us to go do this thing. And that kind of pressure does distress students quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, when we first started laying out some of our initial findings, we got some real pushback from really lovely, smart people working on campus. This is why a researcher always should be working with somebody on campus or a whole set of people. I'm thinking of Mary Jo Gonzalez, who started talking to me about Hispanic students and their experiences. I'm thinking about, there was Daryl Holloman, and there was another guy whose name I can't remember, talking about Black males and their experiences and how that mattered. And so we started evolving some of the measurements, include language that was around their experiences. And what was fascinating was how tightly linked some of that was to distress. To homesickness distress. So I'm super grateful for some of those smart minds that had the nerve to push back, which you want.
And it's such a great example of people saying, I'm listening to my students and here's what they're telling me, right? And translating that into language that maybe the student would have difficulty saying, but they're like, hey, these are the themes that I'm hearing. So that's super helpful. I'm wondering for you, so you have worked with a lot of campuses, MapWorks and iClicker, and some of these other assessments that you have built. What do you think is the biggest mistake or the biggest challenge that schools face when they're trying to implement some of the student success, either identifying students or how we're going to engage? What challenges have you seen schools really grapple with?
I think, and I'm sure you've seen this, they assume it's a silver bullet, whatever it is.
Oh, it's my least favorite thing.
Right? Yeah. I remember it with MapWorks. I remember it with our surveys. We're going to do this and we're going to understand everything.
Yeah.
No, this is going to open up a ton more questions that are more important. There's an institutional researcher creed somewhere or another that I learned early in my career, which is you come to me with a very simple question, you will leave with a whole lot more, but you will think more deeply. You will think smarter. And that is the objective. And you'll be better at stuff, but no system I've ever seen solves it.
Yeah, that's right.
No measurement, no predictive, nothing solves it.
Right.
And I also think nothing off the shelf alone solves it, because you know your campus, you know your students, so you've got to marry the two.
Yeah.
You've got to marry the campus expertise with the system and with the use. Nothing makes me more upset than a binder of my data on a shelf.
I know.
Because it should be implemented. It should be into action. It should be something else. And I can't do that from where I sit.
And it's such a good, like, fundamentally, without a plan, without a comprehensive plan for what we're going to do, we aren't going to be successful. One office can do a great job at one thing, right? But this idea that we're not cohesive across all of the different experiences that a student has on campus, I think is one of the shortfalls. And Sherry, I always said, like, when I was on a campus, I was a really great advisor in a system of not great advising. And so what happened then was that I became known as a great advisor, but that only was helpful for my 200 students. Yeah. It wasn't helpful for the reputation of the university or for most students' experience, right? It was like, you're good at this, but we don't do a good job of this on campus. And so thinking about how do we make those things a campus-wide communication, how do we make them scalable, how do we make them relevant in all of those different areas, I think is just so... the reason people don't do it is it's really hard.
It is. It is hard, but that is the thing that will make the difference.
Yeah.
How do you put together the right people and yeah.
Yeah.
And with the right tool that matches the thing, and not the next new exciting tool, but the right one.
I know. I was just talking to a campus the other day and they were like, yeah, we think the reason our retention is down is because of this technology we're using. And I was like, oh, really? And then one of the VP for Student Success was like, yeah, it's for sure not because we had 3 hurricanes this year, or because 2 of our res halls were out of commission, or because we had this or this or this. That's not why we're low in retention. It's because the technology we're using to keep track of whatever. And I was like, yeah, thank you. Right. It's really helpful to remember, like, it's a whole system with people and processes and technology all working together. And there's a lot of co-influence going on there. Okay. One thing that you said, I think, is really helpful. And that is this idea of, you have a lot of expertise in data, but you also are always thinking about careers and HR things and how teams come together. And you've talked before about the importance of how you build a team with different people, with different expertises, right? And different perspectives. Can you just talk a little bit about your philosophy on how to build a good team and leverage all of those different dispositions, which may or may not work together easily?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a given. Anytime you have really smart, challenging people, they challenge each other. Right. But to me, I will tell you a couple of things. Well, one of the things that I did, even putting together a data team, is I always wanted people really grounded in what does the data mean. Yeah. Because, and it was so funny. I got some flack early on when I was building my team, because they were like, don't you want to hire more PhDs? And I was like, well, that would be lovely, but that's not the minimum threshold here. Like, right. I want people who really understand what we're trying to do, how people would use data, what it means, how to make sense of it when something is wrong with it. And I was really a little bit paranoid that I was making the wrong choice until I talked to a director of finance at Apple, who was hiring people. And I was like, do you hire for domain knowledge or do you hire for technical skills? And she said domain knowledge.
Interesting.
Which that is not what many of us are taught, domain knowledge. So whatever your domain is, not necessarily all the practice, but do they know what it means? Do they know what we're trying to accomplish? Do we know what we're trying to do? And then within that, you build technical skills where you need them and you identify what people love. And the thing that has shocked the heck out of me putting together teams is you find them in different places. You don't find them all in the same place.
Yeah.
You don't find them all in the IR shop. You don't find them all in the whatever. And that they sort of naturally bring a whole set of different things if you listen very carefully.
Yeah.
So I have one, I had one that was a phenomenal designer and thinks about how to package things. I have another one that loves being on the cutting edge of tech. I have another who actually really loves talking to clients and members about what they're trying to do. And I have somebody else who hates that. And so if you start really realizing where people are powerful and where they have potential to solve problems and to think differently, and then the other big thing to me is then you reinforce over and over again with everybody on the team, everybody's separate skill sets.
Right.
Because it's really easy to watch the really good designer and think, oh, I should learn that. And instead, if the team learns to appreciate the fact that they love it and they're good at it, that diminishes the conflict and builds the team and lets people concentrate on the things that they're really good at, that they love, which they'll get better at.
Yeah.
Faster than trying to do the things they don't work well at.
Right. I mean, it is like writing with your left hand or right hand, right? And there are things that you're like, I love doing that. And someone else is like, I would rather die than have to do those things that you do. And so I think it is such a good reminder to articulate what people on your team are good at and to just say like, that is a giftedness you have that we don't have to recreate in every single person. Let's just complement that instead of trying to replace it with someone who's like, I hate that, but I'll learn how to do it. If, the example in my office is always Excel. Like I am smart and I can do a lot of things, but Excel makes me angry. So why do I have to do it?
Well, the other thing I think as a leader, you have to be very careful that people aren't trying to emulate you.
True.
Because they see that you're the leader. So that's what a model is. And I'm going to learn all the skills that you don't need to learn the skills that I have.
No.
You need to learn the skills that you're great at, that you love. And then, it's fine.
Also, Sherry, I don't know if I'm sure you've had this experience before, but sometimes I show up in a meeting with our team and I do what comes naturally to me and they reflect back to me, thank you, that was so helpful. And I'm like, I'll do that all day. Like if that is what I bring to the party, what I just did. And the same thing for them, right? When I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for thinking about that. I never would have considered that. And they're like, I'm just doing what I do. Right. That is the best feeling when you show up in an easy way, right? A thing that just comes naturally. And other people are like, I could never do that. And you're like, great. Then we're going to work great together.
Yeah. And when you appreciate for other people for their easy way of showing up.
For sure.
They're stunned. They're like, wait, but that's
I'm just doing
hard.
me.
And I'm
I like it. Keep doing it. Yeah. Okay. Well, as always, we're right up to time. And I've only asked you like 3 of my 50 questions that I had for you. So my last question for you is, as you think about we have so many things going on in higher education with AI and with big data and with government stuff happening and new kinds of students coming to us and all of that. Do you have an idea of what the next frontier in education is and what should we be getting ready for?
No, I don't. But I do have some strategies, like some quick ones, right? Like, because I don't think we know. And I don't know that I think me sitting in my little zone guessing, I'm going to miss. I mean, they're missing 2 weeks from now what it's
right.
Nobody expected the stock market to tank yesterday. Like we're guessing. So to me, it's about really learning some skills around curiosity and asking questions and exploring and joy in those spaces rather than fear. Yeah. Because fear is not going to help us right now. Fear's just going to shut us down, right? So we got to be curious. We got to explore. We got to play. We got to try things. We got to experiment. Experiment is my word right now. Experiment.
Yeah,
We also have to embrace where we have agency and where we don't.
for sure.
What can I do? What things can I try? And what things are just outside of my zone? I might be able to influence, but which ones are way too far out there that right now I don't know that it's all that useful for me to concentrate on.
Yeah.
And I think it's like trying to stay focused too on, at least for me, instead of learning every new thing that comes out, where do me and my team provide value, and how do I do that in the best possible ways?
Right.
Because it is so easy to be distracted right now. Don't you think? Like
I
there's a new AI something, a new prompt, a new this, everything, all the time. I can't even keep up with them.
Yeah, it's funny because it makes me think about I always have this reflection when I travel, which is there's big problems and there's things we're worried about and there are things that are changing and things we're afraid of and things that are coming and all of that. But I always have this reflection when I'm traveling and when I'm in an airport or an airplane and people are kind to each other. Like they help people get their suitcases up and down and they get up out of the seat so someone can go to the bathroom and they chase someone down in the airport because they've dropped something. Like those are all moments of real connection. And I always come back from those trips just thinking like, yeah, there are really big things that we have to face. But if you can be present in those moments when people are face to face with each other, you're just reminded about a lot of good in the world and a lot of care and a lot of creativity and curiosity and wondering and those sorts of things.
Have you ever, the one thing, I know we're time, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, I have one kid in college and I have one that will go to college in a year and a half. What do I tell them about careers? I tell them, find the things that give you energy, find the things you're curious about, make sure you're a really good learner, make sure you develop good human skills,
Right.
interpersonal and interpersonal, self-management, develop all the skills that will help you in jobs we don't know yet.
Right. That's right. And those are things that you can develop intentionally, right? Those are things that you can say, here's how I'm going to line up my life so that I have these skills so that whatever I face, it's why we like liberal arts, right? Because we're like, if you want to get a major in athletics or music or something else, you still can be intentional about how you choose to learn, connect with people.
Yeah. Teamwork, communication skills, self-management, like all those things will not serve you badly.
Yeah. And I think it connects to what we said at the beginning that you're so good at, which is, choose a thing and engage in it. Pick something to say, like, I don't know how to do this thing, or this thing makes me uncomfortable and I'm going to learn how to do it, and just be disciplined about that. And there are things we can cross off the list too and be like, yeah, I'm never going to be good at that. It's fine.
Or I hate that. So why focus on that right now?
I'm not going to do it.
No.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Love that.
All right, ma'am. Well, we're going to have you on plenty more times, and I'm going to make you talk about the topics of the hour, but we also may have to do another season or another episode of Who Are You? Because you still have so many things that we haven't been able to cover.
I love that. Well, and you know how much I love these conversations. I have a whole list of notes and things to think about. I don't know which ones are going to turn into LinkedIn posts, but some will.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, friends. It's always a joy. And listeners, we will be with you in not next week, but the week after. So thanks so much. Have a great day.